So first, thank you to the UDI and all of you here today for the trust in me and to sit here with Steve and for you to come up today from New York and spend time with us. So for those of you who don't know Steve Schmidt, Steve was the chief political strategist for presidential nominee John McCain and also for George Bush. Steve is recognized as one of the most relied upon political voices in America. Steve can be seen most days on MSNBC and has been through either as a commentator or a strategist for 6 U.S. presidential elections, sort of going 24, 25 years, yes?
Yeah.
Yes. So we're just really privileged to have Steve join us this morning. I just thought I'd set it up by showing 3 quick video clips. Last year when I did my last talk for the UDI, I said, what if Hillary is out and what if Brexit is in? Well, here we are 1 year later, and this room is impacted completely by those 2 decisions with Brexit and with the new President of the United States. And then about 10 days ago, or on May the 2nd, I had the privilege of interviewing in a similar format like I'm going to do with Steve today with CNN's John King. And I just thought I'd start with a clip of that and then go to 2 clips of Steve. So could somebody put that clip up?
They ran a distant, arrogant, data-driven campaign. There's nothing wrong with data. It's a great help to you, but it's not human.
Yeah, they weren't.
It's not human. You have to take the data and then go touch the people. You can't. If you take the people out of politics, and she had no personal relationship.
We have it here too. Is they're aggressive and progressive to get there, and then they conform to stay there.
So just to put it in perspective, that was 7 days before our election last week, and maybe we can learn something by it. So for those of you that haven't seen Woody Harrelson's portrayal of Steve Schmidt in the movie Game Change, along with Julianne Moore playing Sarah Palin, I just wanted to put up a clip of Woody Harrelson playing Steve. So
I can't trust Obama. I've read about him, and he's an Arab. He's not an
No, ma'am. No, ma'am. He's a decent family man, citizen who I just happen to have disagreements with on certain fundamental issues. And that's what this campaign is all about. He's not. Thank you.
Cutting through the bull tonight on the eve of the election, the campaigns are relying on their lucky charms. That was the gist of the story on News.com earlier today.
How's he doing? He's most depressed I've seen him the entire campaign. I can't get him to stop watching MSNBC, which only makes him more miserable. I'm amazed that someone who has been in politics this long takes all the petty stuff so personally.
I mean, that's why they are who they are. That's Reagan, Bush, Clinton, all they want is to be loved. The ones that don't pathologically need to be loved, they don't get the nomination. They don't get to be president. If you'd understood that fact, you might have been able to better handle our Alaskan moose hunter. God, it was a tough campaign.
It wasn't a campaign, it was a bad reality show.
She didn't cost us the election. That was Bush. That was the economy. That was just the cold hand of fate. We didn't have a chance.
And if we did win, would you feel comfortable with President Palin?
Why not? Then we would have won. Well, guys, listen, I too wish that the American people would choose the future Abraham Lincoln or Thomas Jefferson. But unfortunately, that's not the way it works anymore. Now it takes movie star charisma to get elected president. And Obama and Palin, that's what they are. They're stars.
Primary difference being Sarah Palin can't name a Supreme Court decision, whereas Barack Obama was a constitutional law professor.
Fuck you.
So why I thought it was important to play that clip, Steve, is your John McCain is coming through as quite a voice of reason, especially in the last couple of days. And now there's just and one more clip of Steve, the real Steve Schmidt, talking about the firing of Comey and the lying of the president.
Remembering that Republicans were the heroes of Watergate. After all, it was what? Goldwater, Scott, and Rhodes who took the trip down the White House driveway to tell the old man it was over. But let's not forget Howard Baker. Who are you looking to be profiles in courage? And just how unnormal is everything you've seen in the last 24 hours?
Well, it's unprecedented, Brian. Shocking, actually. An enormous abuse of power by the President of the United States. Any Republican member of Congress who takes the President, his spokespeople's assertions that this action occurred because Director Comey was unfair to Hillary Clinton is either a fool or they have so lost sight in this era of tribal politics, their responsibilities to the country, that they've become faithless to their oaths.
So I just wanted to get you in context because not everybody here knows you. So we're so honored to have you up here, and for Ann and for John and for myself, thank you. And as your president would say, is we have the largest turnout ever for a guest speaker.
An amazing looking crowd, amazing, fantastic, the best, the biggest.
There you go. It's the hugest. But you've been very outspoken with your criticism. I think everybody in this room knows the very visible and quotable Steve Schmidt, and maybe uses what you say at the water cooler at Starbucks later in the day. But for me, as a political junkie, a data junkie, and really a precedent junkie, your knowledge of the U.S. Constitution and your forefathers, to me, is absolutely astounding, and I think that's what you're going to take us through today. But very few possess what you have, Steve, is that situational awareness, your ability to take information on the fly and come up with the comments, like we just saw, unscripted. And so today, we haven't had time to rehearse. We're going to be unscripted, similar to the comment you said about Comey recently. Unscripted is across the board. Every person who walks out of the White House and then stands in the briefing room off the North Lawn has lied to the American people. Tough words, but things we need to hear. So if we just continue with being unscripted, we want you to cover it all today. We want you to cover Sarah Palin, the media, fake news, Saturday Night Live, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Sean Spicer, Comey, Mike Huckabee's daughter, Kellyanne Conway, the daughter-wife, thank you, Bill Maher, Steve Bannon, the White House North, the Wall, Bernie, Hillary, almost Le Pen, which I think is really important, Brexit, the EU, China, North Korea, Syria, Russia, Obama, and then the 20% tax on Canadian lumber, and then words we've now heard in the last 2 days is the witch hunt and impeachment. But we're not going to be here all day, so I narrowed it down to 4 questions. I don't even know whether we'll get to the 4, but something that really stuck with me when we had, Kim and I had lunch with you in San Francisco a couple months ago, is you said America's Constitution is set up in the inevitable chance that someone like your president gets into the White House.
True. Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be with all of you. I was looking at the video there with Juliana Moore playing Governor Palin. I said we've all had difficult relationships in our lives. I said mine they made a movie out of, which is, and there's a picture of me in late summer of 2008. I had about the same volume of hair, but it was Bob's color, not the blonde it is today. And 11 weeks later, I was completely white. So I look back with some memories on that. Look, I think you're seeing 2 things in the United States right now. You're seeing someone who is incompetent and inept at a profound level, completely unprepared for his office, a serial liar, who now, through his own ineptitude, has triggered the activation of an independent counsel that will get his tax returns and find out everything there is to find out about what the Russian interference in the American election was. And At the beginning of the week, it wasn't certain that the American people would ever know what the ground truth is on that. And as we come to the end of the week here, it's a certainty that we will. I think though when we look at this in the current sense, I do think it's important to think about the founders of the United States, our founding fathers, and they were geniuses. It was a genius cluster. And the Constitution of the United States, a remarkable document, the oldest constitutional republic in the world, but the Constitution of the United States fundamentally anticipated that one day there would be a president like Trump. I think the founding fathers would have been deeply surprised that it took 242 years to get there. But what you see more than anything else, when you can look past the turmoil and you can look past the shocking news of the hour, the breaking news of the moment, is the system is working. He issued a travel ban that was based on a foundation of religious discrimination. It was thrown out by the federal courts. In order to pass legislation in the United States, you have to get votes in Congress. Can't get any votes in Congress. He fired the FBI director, lied about it, set up the deputy attorney general because the attorney general, after lying about his contact with the Russian ambassador, had to recuse himself from the case. They tried to politicize the deputy attorney general, who has a 30-year reputation for integrity and probity, someone outside of politics. And so what happened yesterday is the deputy attorney general appointed a special prosecutor. After he signed the papers, he called the White House and gave them 25 minutes notice before they released it to the press. And the person that they picked to be the special prosecutor is the single most respected figure in American law enforcement, Robert Mueller. And so, I think you see the system working in a lot of ways, constraining the president, constraining his ability to act. People have said on television, the president of the United States is the CEO of America. He's the boss. He's not. He's not. He is the head of the executive branch, which is one of three co-equal branches of government. And there are profound constraints on the exercise of the power of the president, which he's finding out a little bit more about every day.
So, you said at coffee this morning, paralleling this to Bill Clinton.
Yeah, look, this independent counsel deal is very, very bad news for Donald Trump. When you look back at Bill Clinton's impeachment, which was fundamentally premised on his lying about his escapades with the White House intern, obstruction of justice and a perjury charge, but the special counsel was impaneled to investigate a real estate deal. And so like James Bond has a license to kill, and a special prosecutor in this circumstance has a license to go find a crime. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a crime that he was impaneled to investigate, whether one occurred. So where this ends up, how unpredictable it is anyone's guess. But certainly the president has gone out of his way. No presidential candidate has never not disclosed their taxes. And Donald Trump's taxes were clearly never going to be seen. Well, they're going to be seen now. Because the special prosecutor has subpoena power, and if he wants them, he's going to be able to go get them. And what you've seen out of this administration, just nonstop, is a unprecedented level of lying. Lying by the president, by the vice president, by the White House staff members, and absurd lies, little kid lies. No elegance to the lie. Not lying with aplomb. I said it's a jelly donut lie. It's going to your 5-year-old. You say, who ate the jelly donut? And you got kid looking back at you with jelly donut glaze all over their face, saying, I don't know who ate the jelly donut. And so, it's that type of lying. And I'd say there's a scene in the book 1984, where Winston being interrogated by a party official, and the party official's holding up 4 fingers. And he says to Winston, "How many fingers am I holding up?" And Winston says, "I see 4 fingers." The party official says, "But there are 5 fingers, Winston. Or maybe there can be 3 fingers. There are as many fingers as the party tells you there is." And so all politicians, to some degree, in their electoral interest, their self-interest, they spin a little, they dissemble a little, lie a little bit. But Trump's lies are of a different order of magnitude because they are lies of authority that require obedience to things that are plainly untrue in front of your eyes. And so when you have a picture of Barack Obama's crowd size, which is double the size of Donald Trump's, and the White House spokesperson goes and says that the Trump crowd size is bigger, period, end of discussion, right? That forces you to subordinate what you can plainly see is true to a new definition of truth, which is what the leader believes is true. And this is pernicious in a democracy because in a democracy, you must have truth. Because without truth, there can't be accountability. And without accountability, government of the people, by the people, for the people perishes. It collapses. So the strains on the system in a time where trust has collapsed in very nearly every institution in the country, with the exception of the U.S. military. And by the way, it's a phenomenon that is not exclusive to the United States. We've seen this phenomenon play out in the Brexit vote. We've seen it play out in France with Marine Le Pen knocking on the glass. We're seeing it play out in the German elections. We've seen it play out in the Polish and Hungarian elections, rise of a right-wing nationalism and populism. And Canada has been insulated from these trends, but it's not immunized from them. As you look around the world, and there's a lot of causes for what's going on.
And that's forgetting Middle America-ish.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so now I'll get to one of my first 4 questions and take us way back. So you get up in the morning, November 8th. New York Times has 97%. It's Hillary. 12 hours later, Hillary, unprecedented, doesn't come out and make a concession speech. What is the difference in the Steve that got up that morning and went to bed that night, besides maybe wanting to move to Canada?
So I thought that Hillary Clinton would win. There's a fallacy that the polling was wrong in the U.S. election. It wasn't wrong. The polling had the race about 2.1 percentage points up for Hillary Clinton. Which she won by 3 million in the popular vote, but across the states of Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan, Donald Trump pulled an inside straight, and by 80,000 votes, he was elected president of the United States. I was, the president, has told me directly that I was the first person on television that said he would be the Republican nominee. When he came down the escalator in Trump Tower, most of the commentary was he's a clown, he's a joke, this isn't going anywhere. And I said, I think he's going to be the Republican nominee because he's saying things that millions of people are screaming at their TV sets every day. I thought that Trump would send a powerful wake-up call to the country. That he would tap on the glass. I mean, the truth of the matter is I've been involved in a really high level 2 presidential campaigns. We won one and lost one. I didn't think that the American people would put him in office, frankly. But by narrow margin, he was able to do it. And I think if you took a bunch of us up here who have run and won presidential campaigns and you gave us truth serum and you looked at Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump as blind candidates, right? Candidate A, candidate B, you'd look at the poll numbers for about 30 seconds and you'd say neither of these people could ever conceivably be elected president of the United States. But the way that one unelectable candidate wins is by being lucky enough to run against another unelectable candidate. And you look at the end of that campaign. How did Hillary Clinton spend the last 10 days of the campaign, right? She was in Arizona, she was in Texas, she wasn't in Wisconsin, and she wasn't in Ohio, and she wasn't in Michigan and Pennsylvania as much as she should have been. She was flying around with Beyonce and Jay-Z and Bruce Springsteen, and Trump finishes the campaign alone in a cornfield in Iowa, and he says, I've given it all I got, just like you good people do every day. You good people who get screwed by the banks, screwed by the government, screwed by Wall Street. Now it's up to you. And he had a strong close. And of course, the other intervening event as you come down the stretch was James Comey reopening the investigation.
Do you think that was a defining moment?
Of course it was a defining moment. And we'll talk a little bit, I hope, about media as we go through this. But when you look at media through the prism of weight of message, and what's being heard in Red America, what's being heard in conservative America, it was never on NBC or CNN, but Trump would go and he would do his rally, and he would have lines in the rally. He said, we're going to build a wall, and Mexico's going to pay for it. I think President Fox, by the way, yesterday tweeted out, he said, we won't pay for the wall, but we will chip in for the impeachment hearings. But it's like going to a Bruce Springsteen concert, right? It's Trump's lines, right? That, it's like hearing Springsteen play Thunder Road or Born to Run, right? You were going to go to the Trump rally, you were going to hear Trump's, best applause lines. What's interesting, if you watch the Trump rally during the campaign with the sound off, people are happy. They're laughing. They're having fun. He's entertaining as hell. You look at a Hillary Clinton rally, you're saying, why aren't the cameras showing the machine gun nests, right, that have these people held captive here, right? I mean, just joyless, plotting, right, miserable. But one thing that Trump said in every meeting, in every big rally, he would get to a point and he would say, Huma, we have to talk about Huma. This lovely, lovely woman, married to the pervert, married to Anthony Weiner. He goes, he's got the emails. He's got the emails. She showed him the emails. I'm telling you, that pervert's got our most secret emails. And lo and behold, 5 days before the election, guess whose computer the emails are on?
Weiner.
Anthony Weiner's computer. Now, that didn't make the lead on ABC News or CNN or MSNBC, but it sure as hell made the lead on Fox News and every talk radio station and every conservative blog in the country. And what you saw is Hillary Clinton lose about 4 points, in the final couple days of the election. And I do think it was, the determinative event. And by the narrowest of margins across 3 states, he's elected president.
So leading up to the election, it's unprecedented how much coverage the guy got. Is it a bit like Napoleon now, is with the media, those who giveth can taketh away?
Oh, sure. Look, I mean, Trump just overwhelmed, his competitors in the primaries with free media coverage. He was great for ratings. I was speaking at an event here in Vancouver during the primaries, and I think it was before the second debate, and there was a Canadian debate taking place between Harper and Trudeau. And it was funny, someone in the room says to someone else, will you watching the debate tomorrow? And the answer was, yeah, I think Harper's gonna. I said, no. So, I mean, the U.S. debate, right? And it was a room full of Canadians. I mean, the first presidential debate, on the Republican primary stage, it was the highest rated non-sports cable broadcast in American television history. I mean, it was great. It was great for ratings, and you see a huge market for political coverage of this administration. People just can't turn away from the TV on this stuff.
Yeah, he decimated the stage. He got Hillary to say the deplorables.
He did, and that was a big moment in the campaign. I mean, I do think this feature in an Anglo-American, Canadian, Australian sense that we in my career we have debated politics on a vertical axis, right, that separates right from left. And that line runs down the middle of the field. And in the United States, we debate politics between the 45-yard lines. Sometimes very hyperbolically. The Democratic preferred top marginal tax rate in the country is 39.6%. The preferred Republican rate is 35%. If you listen to the campaign rhetoric, that's the delta between a just and an unjust society. In Canada, I would say you debate between the 52 and the 48-yard lines. But I think increasingly politics is being defined now by a horizontal line. And above that line are the people who have benefited from globalization and the technological revolution, and below that line are the people that have been left behind. And below that line, the defining event of this generation for those people was not the 9/11 attacks, it was the economic collapse in 2008. And what came out of that economic collapse for those people? Well, 13 million families lost their homes, 12 million Americans lost their jobs on a 6-month period. The Wall Street bankers who precipitated the crisis got $1 trillion in bailouts. Their bonuses were paid in full. The banks are bigger than ever. And no one went to jail. And so what you see in European politics is you see voters moving in one election from far left parties to far right parties, and everybody's sitting scratching their heads. How can this be? And so in the United States, we didn't talk enough about the connection between a Donald Trump voter and a Bernie Sanders voter. And those Bernie Sanders voters who voted for Trump in the general, how could that be? How do you go, right, from a socialist candidate, and Bernie Sanders isn't even a Democrat, it's a legitimate socialist candidate. How do you go from a socialist candidate to voting for Donald Trump in the general election? And the way that happens is because when you look at politics, not ideologically, but through that horizontal line, those voters are united in a belief that the system is rigged. It's not on the level, it's rigged against them, it's rigged against the people at the bottom for the people at the top. One set of rules up here, different set of rules down here. And in fact, the #1 predictor of a county switching from Barack Obama in 2008 and 12 to Donald Trump in 2016 was the rate of and the intensity of the opioid epidemic in these counties, in the states that decided the election. And so, I pick up the paper on any given day, and I spend a fair amount of time with clients in Silicon Valley, and you talk about disruption, and you herald the age of the driverless cars and the driverless trucks. And anybody want to guess what the #1 living wage job in the United States for a non-college educated white male is?
Driver.
Right? It's driving something from point A to point B, whether it's in a car and it's in a truck. But it's not just going to be the truck drivers and the transport drivers. It's going to be the radiologists, and it's going to be the accountants as we move into the dawn of the age of artificial intelligence. Then you're going to have massive job displacement on top of those people below that horizontal line who haven't seen a real wage increase since the late 1990s, while the income gains accrue to the people at the top. And then, what does the candidate of the Democratic Party, the working person's party, historically in the United States, say about those people? She calls them deplorable. Now, I'll tell you this much, I spend a fair amount of time, I live in Park City, Utah. I spend a fair amount of time in this beautiful country, in Toronto, and Montreal and Vancouver, and spent a lot of time in Seattle and the Bay Area and Silicon Valley and New York City. When I sit in a dinner party in New York City or San Francisco and people talk about politics, you know what? That's exactly how those people look at the people who live in the middle of the country. Dumb, ignorant, racist, homophobic. You want to talk about how Donald Trump gets reelected, right? Keep calling his voters stupid, right? Keep condescending to them. And so I think kind of a threshold issue for the Democrats, you know, assuming Trump survives, is this, is that their ability to win is entirely dependent on their ability to produce a candidate who can campaign with love in his or her heart for the Trump voter and their fellow countrymen. And no one should discount the level of condescension and the impact, you know, it had in this election. And these Trump voters, right, are not so faithful to Donald Trump as that they're anti-Trump. They hate the people who are criticizing Trump, not because they're criticizing Trump, but because they believe that those people have contempt for them. And it's a powerful dynamic in American life right now.
So going on the people who have nothing left to lose will resort to anything. Where was Joe Biden and where was Bill Clinton? You know, Joe Biden is now saying that he believes they dropped the ball on Middle America.
Yeah.
Where was that advice for Hillary during the election?
Well, I mean, it wasn't as if it wasn't like it wasn't self-evident. Look, what Democrats believed is that Barack Obama had permanently changed the composition of the American electorate, right? That the electorate that elected Barack Obama in 2008, 2012 was now a permanent fixture of American politics. Black, brown, millennial, skewed women heavy, and it turned out not to be the case. When you take Barack Obama off of the ballot, a lot of bad things happen to Democrats. So in 2010, in 2014, 2016, Barack Obama went through 3 elections and he said, I'm not on the ballot in this election, but my policies are. And so over those 3 elections, the Democrats lost a total of 1,400 seats nationwide. Now, the truth of the matter is whether it's John Kennedy or Ronald Reagan or Bill Clinton or Barack Obama, you know, about once a generation there is a political athlete, you know, that comes along that's of a caliber of a Wayne Gretzky or a LeBron James or a Tiger Woods. That's a once in a generation athlete. And politics is no different from that. So when Barack Obama is not on the ballot and Hillary Clinton is, and the electorate snaps back to the way it's always been before there was a Barack Obama, guess what? There's a demographic that you actually need to get votes from that we don't talk about at all. White men. And there's a lot of us in America, a lot of us. And so her inability to connect with that demographic in those states, in those Democratic constituencies, is the reason she's not the president. And it's the reason I suspect that if Joe Biden had been the nominee, that Joe Biden would have won by 5 or 6 points, because he's anchored in a Democratic Party that is deeply connected, almost spiritually, to that white working class voter in these places. That when you see people, you know, who are working, you know, iron workers on the scaffolds of big buildings that they're making, you know, Joe Biden's someone who looks at that and he sees dignity. You know, he sees dignity in the labor and the work. He marvels at, you know, people doing things with their hands, creating, building. He doesn't have contempt for them. And that was a big dynamic in this election, for sure.
But where was he in the movie? They didn't let him speak?
Well, I mean, he in the places he campaigned at, the election wasn't about Joe Biden. It was about the two people at the, on the top of the ticket. And, popularity is not transferable in politics, certainly not at a presidential level.
Yeah, and definitely Obama's constituents weren't transferable.
They were not enthusiastic about her.
So we'll come back to your president and Hillary, et cetera. But you get a lot of phone calls. You represent a lot of clients. Can you tell us about a call from Maria Shriver on Schwarzenegger?
Oh. Huh.
Unless there's something else.
No, I was. I was. It was one of the interesting chapters of my my career is the time I spent running Arnold Schwarzenegger's campaign, and as the story goes that he had been elected governor in the special election. He tried to, California is an initiative and referendum state, and he tried to pass a number of reforms. He was crushed by the labor unions, and he was down to a 29% approval rating. And apparently, Tim Russert, the deceased NBC host of Meet the Press, who was very good friends with her, she said, I don't know really any Republicans. We had to get a Republican to run this thing and get it turned around. And for whatever reason, Tim offered my name, and I wound up running Arnold Schwarzenegger's campaign for governor of California. And it was an interesting experience for 100 different reasons. But I was in the White House, and my last responsibility there, I ran the 2 Supreme Court confirmations for the Chief Justice and the Associate Justice. And on the day that Samuel Alito was confirmed to the Supreme Court, I resigned from the White House. I said goodbye to the President and the Vice President, and the next morning I was in Santa Monica, California, in Arnold Schwarzenegger's office, which is a big departure from the West Wing of the White House. You walk into Schwarzenegger's offices, and there's an annex off the office that is a recreation of the Austrian farmhouse that he grew up in. And you have the Terminator exoskeleton in the corner, and under the pool table is the alligator from True Lies and the Harrier jet, and he's got all the Mr. Olympia trophies on the wall. And I begin this polling presentation to him, and I said, Governor, there's a lot of really bad news in the poll. We're losing to every conceivable Democrat that may run against you. We're at about 29%. Go on for a while and say, but there's 2 pieces of good news in the poll. One is that people still like you personally, and 2, they still want to see you be successful. So we think that if you essentially go out and you say, I moved too fast, I didn't listen enough, but I hear you loud and clear now, I'm going to do better. For everybody I've let down, I apologize. And from today forward, I'm going to do yada, yada, yada. And I said, but then you got to act completely different. You can't drive around in the Hummer anymore. You can't wear your action jackets. You got to be in a suit. We got to move to the middle. We want to try to pass climate change legislation. I said, we want to try to pass a big infrastructure bill. I said, you can't call the Democrats girly men anymore. You got to be a big, magnanimous, gracious leader. Someone attacks you, you got to turn the other cheek. And I finished this presentation up, and Schwarzenegger's just puffing on a cigar. He doesn't say a word for a minute, and he goes, absolutely, I will play this role perfectly. I will play this role perfectly.
And the accent's
and he did.
Beautiful.
He said, I will play this. He said, I will play this role perfectly. He goes, let's go have lunch.
Thank you for that. Can you put up the next clip? I don't know who to look at. There's just one clip from Game Change.
Got it. Call you in 10. What's going on?
We're gonna lose Pennsylvania.
Ohio.
Steve,
What's wrong?
I didn't vote. I couldn't do it. I didn't vote.
I just think that clip shows such integrity and morals. And one of the questions I had, and where we've been wandering, maybe it isn't as applicable, but with what's going on in the world, was Barack Obama, so the last American president, the last leader of the free world, meaning that diplomatic Obama, that Nobel Peace Prize Obama, the First Lady Michelle Obama, that civil president, that presidential dignity, that leader that comes in a room and the room just freezes. And I guess my question is sort of threefold: was he really the last diplomatic leader, the most powerful man in the free world, now that, middle America has its voice? They're out. They're going to continue to fight. They can be heard, and you have people like your president that can get to the top. And did you feel there was any parallels between sort of the acceptance in the crowd that went for Palin and the crowd that went for Trump? And probably tying that in, did you vote?
In this past election? Yeah, I voted.
We're not going to ask for who, but did you vote?
No, yeah, of course I voted. I voted in the state of Utah, and so there was an independent candidate on the ballot named Evan McMullin, who's the person I voted for. But look, I would answer the question, I think, in a little bit of a different way than you asked it. Donald Trump is the first president of the United States since World War II who clearly lacks the moral authority to lead the Western nations militarily if the occasion should arise. So if you look at militarily, the countries that have potent militaries, Canada, the United Kingdom, in particular, Canadian people, the British people, no country, I suspect, would send its forces into harm's way alongside American forces in the way that happened, for example, in the first Gulf War with a President Donald Trump, for many, many different reasons. And that loss of moral authority on the part of the President of the United States makes the world profoundly more dangerous. When World War II ended, Douglas MacArthur, in his global address on the deck of the battleship Missouri, talked about the fact that since there had been people on Earth, there had been agreements between tribes and villages and ultimately nation states to try to stop people from killing each other. But when diplomacy failed, there was the ability through conflict to resolve the issues. And when the darkness versus the light test came, when fascism and Nazism needed to be confronted, there was a great global struggle. And in that struggle, 80 million people were killed. 80 million. And not a small number of Canadians. And so MacArthur made the point that after the First World War, there were institutions that came into being to keep the peace, and that all those institutions failed. And less than a generation later, that catastrophe was followed by another by orders of magnitude, worse than what had preceded. And he said, now we will need to have institutions that are much better than anything that's ever come before, because war is no longer an option at the dawn of the nuclear age. The next global war will lead to the extinction of humans on the planet. You know, we've reached the point scientifically where we can bring about, you know, our end as a species. And so what came out of that imperfectly was a US-led liberal global order. The Marshall Plan, which rebuilt Europe, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which kept the peace on the European continent, the European Union, you know, the collective security agreements, a rules-based, values-based global order. And so like right at the exact moment in time where the last of the survivors of the death camps are moving on from a single human lifetime, and the last of the men who stormed the beaches in Normandy are moving, you know, past the, you know, dying and moving past the point of a lifetime. You have a president of the United States that seems broadly indifferent to that US-led liberal global order. Talks about NATO's a relic of the past, seemingly hostile to the European Union, which, despite all its flaws and faults, has, you know, been instrumental in maintaining the longest period of prosperity and peace in the history of Europe. And so, you know, all of those things combined together, I think, in a worrying, you know, in a worrying way. Now, the next president always has oppositional virtues to the last president. So, so Donald Trump is an aberration, you know, in the office. I doubt very much that, you know, the next president's going to be you know, another Donald Trump. He's likely to be, or she's likely to be, quite the opposite, you know, from a character perspective, and that'll be a real referendum, I think, after a couple of years of this. And I think it's important when you think about the Trump presidency. I mean, today's like day 118. I mean, it feels like year 118. You know, but it's 118 days in to a four-year term, and so we'll see what happens in the midterm elections, and we'll see what happens, you know, as we get ready, you know, in the early stages for the next presidential. And one of the great things about American politics is this: it never stops, right? Like the plotting, right, for who's running against him is like well underway, and the 2020 campaign started about 20 minutes after Hillary Clinton conceded. And so it's...
So you see a way out of this. You see a way back to diplomacy.
Sure. I think the system is resilient. The country is resilient. I think there's a tendency, you know, for people, you know, to be disconnected from history, right? To, you know, think that in their time that we're either living in the worst of times, we're living in the best of times. I mean, I can sit here and, you know, I can, you know, easily rattle off 20 challenges by orders of magnitude, you know, and threat are greater than that posed by Donald Trump to the country, that the country has, you know, has endured. And I do think that, you know, one of the things to understand about America is that America has been successful most oftentimes in spite of its government, not because of it, right? It is a decentralized country with regard to its political power, and so Trump is, you know, a combination of fascinating and appalling and horrifying, and, you know, you're watching this unfold in real time. But again, you know, what actual damage, right, has he been able to produce in his first 118 days? I mean, aside from the, you know, fraying of trust in institutions that, you know, result from the lying and the comportment and the behavior and the, you know, the lack of dignity, not much, because the federal courts, the Congress, the, you know, other branches of government have been able to put constraints on him when he's overstepped his authority.
I love it. So my last question, because it shows here we have a minute left, we'll run a bit over. I'll just tell you a story. So America is very similar to Canada. It's a land of opportunity. It's a very diverse cultures. And when I've told the story before, when I was in Las Vegas for the Super Bowl, a lady sitting next to me, I said, I get it with Trump, the economy, and stock market, everything's doing great, but the hate that's coming through. And what was said to me was, are your children Muslim? And I said, no. And she said, will your grandchildren be Muslim? And I said, no. And she said, then what do you care? And I don't know whether that's a typical Trump supporter, but it sort of really shocked me. But you're up at 30,000 feet and you see it all. So, he throws down a gauntlet. There's a 20% tax against us. You've said it didn't go through. He tried twice on a travel ban for
that would only be 5% higher than the tax against us for buying real estate in Vancouver.
Well said. Well said. I wasn't for that one, which I think is known in the room. But so my question is, and it's a lot to ask.
I'm working with the governor of Florida on this, by the way. I'm only kidding. Snowbird tax.
But so my question is, should we be scared, and how would you advise us, and what would you say should be the takeaway for Canadian politicians going forward, and that federally, provincially, civically, seeing America's experience right now?
So, look, I had occasion a couple of weeks ago to be in Ottawa, and I was meeting with some senior Canadian government officials, and it was on the day that Trump had gone to Wisconsin and made his dairy comments. And in the meeting, I said I had no idea that Canada was the North Korea of milk before today, and that I said I said the Prime Minister, it's like Kim Jong-moo. And so Trump had gone to Wisconsin, and he issued his declarations attacking the unfairness of the Canadian dairy industry. And very predictably, the Canadian ambassador in Washington, he was totally ready. He was like, they knew they had the statement sitting on the desk, right? He's going up there, he's going to do it. And I said to some of the Canadian government officials, I said, with regard to his comments on dairy, I said, it's important. He only means it if you believe he meant it, right? And they said, well, what do you mean by that? And I said, there's a much greater chance that you and I have been closer to a Martian than he's been to a cow, right? I mean, right? That was episode 92, right, of the presidency, right? He's going to Wisconsin. His chief of staff's from Wisconsin. The Speaker of the House is from Wisconsin. I said, episode 91 has nothing to do with episode 92, and episode 92 has nothing to do with episode 93. So the proper response to something like that is to say that we know that we're up against one of the greatest negotiators in all the world. This is a $1 trillion trading relationship between the United States and Canada, responsible for like a gazillion jobs. 35 states are Canada's, for 35 states, Canada is their largest trading partner. And we know that we're going to have a tough negotiation, but get to a great deal. And I said, so you guys are going to go into these negotiations on NAFTA, right, with a lot of Canadian earnestness, right? You're going to have the big binders, thousands of pages, and the research. You're going to have the team, right? You're going to have everyone ready. I said, you need 3 pages there. I said, because I don't know whether it's episode 140 or 170, but somewhere between episodes 200 and 250 at the latest, there's going to be the I fixed NAFTA episode, right? And so figure out on 2 to 3 pages, what it is that you're going to give them that allows him to say, I fixed NAFTA. And then once he fixes NAFTA, he's going to be on to something else somewhere out there. And so here's the point. Donald Trump isn't going to abrogate the NAFTA agreement because he would tank the stock market by 10,000 points, cause a economic recession across North America, and it would take out millions of American jobs. And amongst the 35 states that Canada is their largest trading partner are included the states that he narrowly won the election, in. So it's not going to happen. And I think that, the bonds between the United States and Canada, the longest, largest, undefended, peaceful border in the history of the world, the connections between the people, culturally, from a business perspective, from an athletic perspective, are so much deeper than who the president is or who the prime minister is at any given moment. There's a remarkable play in Broadway right now, which for those of you who make it to New York City, it will make you incredibly proud to be a Canadian, I suspect. And it's called Come From Away, and it's the story of the people of Gander, Newfoundland, and the kindness and the hospitality shown to the largely Americans that are stranded there for the days after the 9/11 attacks. So, look, when you look at the Trump presidency and you see Donald Trump needlessly provoking Mexico after a 30-year arc of sustained improved relations, you look at him antagonizing Canada on the basis of NAFTA. You look at Donald Trump handing the Chancellor of Germany, a $750 billion bill for back taxes, I suppose, on a defense bill. I think it's appalling. But at the end of the day, it's all theater. It's all show. It's not going to happen. And and I think generally people's anxiety level should be a little bit lower than it is.
Yeah, it sounds to me like if you praise him, he'll collapse.
Yeah, I mean, look, he's Trump. Again, the NAFTA thing, the dairy issue is a great, is just a great way to understand Trump. I mean, Trump doesn't care what happens in California. He knows California. He's going to get as many votes in California as he does in Ontario, right? But if he goes to Wisconsin, a state that he narrowly won, and he talks about milk off of his script, and everyone starts clapping, and then the Canadians react, well, no one up there is voting for me. These people are clapping. That incentivizes him to do more of it. I think he's just pretty predictable in that way.
Okay. So we've got to bring it to a close, but something I think that you said that it applies a lot to what's going on in politics today, but when you were asked on Morning Joe, what would you tell the president regarding his assertion that President Obama tapped his phones? And you said, I think somebody has to go in and tell the president, 1, this makes you look unhinged. 2, it's not true, and now you're at the hour. If you don't stop this, you will destroy your presidency. You have no path to be successful. You will precipitate an international crisis. You are devaluing the words of the President of the United States at every hour. And I thought this was really important. At some point in the next 4 years, the President of the United States will appear before the cameras on a day of national tragedy and have to talk to the American people, and he needs credibility to do that. And I think it's so powerful. And I want to thank you for coming, for your integrity, for your wisdom, for your humor. It was really difficult for me to figure out what 4 questions to ask, but you don't need questions. And we're just so honored you came up here. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.